Well, the Libyan capital could become a lonely outpost for supporters of Muammar al-Gaddafi as anti-government protesters surround the city. Well, these are the areas reported to be under control now of anti-government forces. One of the few exceptions is Tripoli, the capital. We're also getting reports the country's second most important military airport, not far from Benghazi, has now fallen to the protesters. Private jets and civilian aircraft at the Al Banin airport were seen grounded. Military personnel say they've joined the People's Revolution. Well, if true, the takeover is another blow to Gaddafi's regime. With more on the opposition's growing area of control, Jackie Rowland reports now from Benghazi.
The town of AlJazeera lies just 50 kilometers to the west of Tripoli. Now it has become a new front line in the battle between pro- and anti-Gaddafi forces. These pictures were shot by journalists brought here by the regime. The idea was to show the outside world that Gaddafi is still in control here. Instead, the reporters found that AlJazeera was in rebel hands, at least for now. The town is surrounded by pro-Gaddafi forces. Both sides are armed with tanks and anti-aircraft guns. Gaddafi's crackdown against his opponents has been the bloodiest and most ruthless in the wave of uprisings sweeping North Africa and the Middle East. But it doesn't seem to have stemmed the rebellion against his 4-decade rule. In the east of the country, opposition forces are welcoming visitors to what they are calling Free Libya. In the city of Benghazi, there are signs of a return to normal. Banks have reopened here and in the town of Al-Baida, both of which threw off Gaddafi's rule about a week ago.
The banks have been closed for 8 days, but thanks to our brave young men, they've managed to reopen in an orderly fashion. And praise be to God, everything is moving along smoothly.
And while residents stock up at the supermarket, the power vacuum that was left in the city is being filled. Local committees that are running towns and cities in the east of Libya have rallied behind a new leader, the former justice minister who resigned over the brutal repression.
What is happening in Libya is a popular revolution led by the youth, supported by the people against oppression and against a dictator who has led Libya with a singular point of view and with a vengeful attitude and bloodthirsty soul. Now we announce to the world that we intend to build a democratic nation with institutions that respect international obligations and treaties.
Libya relies on its oil fields. They're the mainstay of its economy. But now production appears to be grinding to a halt. This refinery is pumping 11,000 barrels a day, only 1/10 of what it would normally produce, according to the manager. The expatriate workers who used to man the plant have fled to escape the violence. Muammar Gaddafi's options are shrinking. Opposition forces continue to advance towards the capital, and the international community has imposed sanctions which further limit his room for maneuver. But the Libyan leader still shows no sign of being in the mood to surrender. Jackie Rowland, Al Jazeera, Benghazi.
Well, the Libyan leader still has some support. Just outside the capital, Gaddafi loyalists took to the streets, waving posters and chanting slogans. Outside the city of AlJazeera in western Libya, there were similar scenes. The city centre is in anti-government hands, but protesters say pro-Gaddafi forces are preparing to launch a counter-offensive against them. Well, we have some amateur footage, allegedly, of Saif al-Islam, one of Gaddafi's sons, rallying supporters in Libya. It's unclear when and where these pictures were taken, but in it, Saif al-Islam tells the people that, quote, enemy forces are spreading rumours that the security forces weren't joining the protesters and that weapons would be provided to people ready to fight for Libya. Well, the U.S. Secretary of State is in Geneva ahead of a UN Human Rights Council meeting on Libya. Hillary Clinton arrived in Switzerland late on Sunday. The United States has been vocal in its condemnation of Gaddafi's regime, calling on the Libyan leader to respect his people's wishes and leave now. Well, Mark Goldberg is the managing editor of UN Dispatch. That's the UN's global affairs blog. He joins me now live from Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for being with us. Let's start with the expected meeting between the UN Secretary General and the US President. What's on the table for the two?
That's right. Ban Ki-moon will be traveling here to Washington, D.C. tomorrow to meet at the White House with Barack Obama. And Libya is obviously certainly on top of the agenda. I think one thing that we can expect to hear from the Secretary General, to be discussed between the two, is this idea of humanitarian access. You know, it hasn't been discussed too much in the press, but you know, beyond the slaughter that you're seeing in these YouTube videos, there's going to be this slow burn of a humanitarian crisis as well. The UN Refugee Agency has reported several tens of thousands of refugees are fleeing across the border. The World Food Program has warned that food shortages are in short supply in Libya. So you're going to try to see some sort of coordination on the humanitarian front, as well as to discuss the Security Council resolution that was passed just this weekend.
Well, if you listen to, as I'm sure you have, some of the senators in the US, they're talking about everything from imposing no-fly zones to even arming rebel forces. Is any of that a real possibility as the two discuss what to do next or how to take the resolution forward?
Right. I don't think that we're going to see a no-fly zone. That seems to be spoken more in the press than actually by any country who might be willing to enforce a no-fly zone. I mean, that's the big question. If you're going to have a no-fly zone, certain countries that have that kind of capacity need to step up and impose it. But it doesn't look like that is in the offerings.
What about the idea of perhaps moving a little bit further forward in recognizing the sort of rival alternative government or administration that's been set up in Libya by the former Minister of Justice?
Right. I think that's part of what you're seeing Secretary Clinton doing in Europe this weekend. She's holding several meetings with other European countries who have probably closer ties to Libya than the United States does. Remember, you know, the United States had sanctions on Libya until 2008. So she'll be working with other countries to enforce the Security Council resolution that was passed on Tuesday. You know, remember, Security Council resolutions don't enforce themselves. It requires a pretty strong and coordinated diplomatic effort to actually impose the measures that were called for in the resolution. And I think that's what you're seeing both by Hillary Clinton in Geneva and between Ban Ki-moon and Barack Obama here in Washington.
All right, Mark Goldberg, thanks so much for your comments there from Washington, D.C.
Thank you very much.
Well, Tunisia has a new Prime Minister, AlBaji Qaid Sebsi. He succeeds Mohamed Ghannouchi, who resigned on Sunday. There had been renewed street violence in the capital prior to his departure. Nadeem Baba reports.
A surprise announcement as Tunisia's interim president names a new Prime Minister.
At this critical moment, in order to maintain our national interest and to ensure that the state is up and running with all its institutions, I requested Mr. Baja Qaid Sebsi to assume the office of Prime Minister, and he thankfully accepted this responsibility.
AlBaji Qaid Sebsi is 84 and a former foreign minister. He served under Tunisia's post-independence leader Habib Bourguiba and under President Zine Al Abidine Ben Ali. His appointment came hours after interim Premier Mohamed Ghannouchi unexpectedly stepped down.
I am not prepared to be the person who takes decisions which result in the loss of life.
The move comes at a tense time for Tunisia. Sunday saw new clashes on the streets of the capital. Officials say at least 5 people have died during street protests since Friday. Mohamed Ghannouchi took over as premier on the 14th of January after President Ben Ali fled to Saudi Arabia following weeks of protests. Critics say that since the Jasmine Revolution, there's not been real reform, and Ghannouchi's replacement is unlikely to change that.
He's out of touch, he's out of time, he's belonging other generation. What the Tunisian youth need today, who someone will be able to represent them, who someone will be able to respond to their legitimate demands.
Mohamed Ghannouchi has repeated the government's pledge to hold elections by mid-July. But almost 200 people have been arrested over the weekend. It's not clear how far the new Prime Minister can quell the anger on the streets. Nadeem Baba, Al Jazeera.
Well, in Oman, at least 2 people have been killed in clashes between protesters and security forces. 8 others were injured. Police used tear gas to disperse the demonstrators. 2,000 people had gathered in the country's industrial centre of Sohar to demand political reform. Well, Oman's ruler quickly offered a new jobs plan in response to the protest. Sultan Qaboos bin Said ordered the government to find jobs for 50,000 people. And he said he'll also give every job seeker around $400 a month until they find work. Qaboos will also consider giving more power to the popularly elected Advisory Council. Well, Yemen's President Ali Abdullah Saleh has addressed a meeting of his army generals as he tries to shore up his grip on power. The country has been racked by weeks of pro- and anti-government protests. Saleh vowed to defend the unity of Yemen to the last drop of blood. Hashim Ahlabara reports now from the capital.
Remaining defiant, President Saleh telling his army officers that Yemen is in danger of disintegration and that they should fight for its unity.
We have vowed to defend the republican system, the unity and safety of the republic till the last drop of our blood, and this vow stands now. There is an attempt to split the country into north and south.
The president was referring to his arch rivals, secessionists asking the south to break away from the north, and the Houthi rebels in their ongoing battle against the government for greater autonomy in their region.
This isn't the first time that the president has met his army generals since the start of the crisis in the country. But his statements tell a great deal about his confusion, and it's clear that he has been inspired by Gaddafi's speeches.
But thousands of young Yemenis who have taken to the streets across the country have totally different demands. The departure of the regime. Demands waved off by Saleh's ruling party as illegitimate.
It won't be an Egyptian-style change. It won't be a Tunisian type of change. But unfortunately, if it goes to become very close to what's happening now in Libya, then I don't by any means rule out the possibility of an international and regional intervention here.
For these protesters, the movement has come a long way, inspired many Yemenis and made sacrifices that calls for dialogue by the government are too late. But if the president is determined to cling to power, the opposition and the anti-government protesters say they will muster more men here in the capital and across the country to put an end to what they describe as an autocratic regime. Hashim Al-Barra, AlJazeera, Sana'a.
Well, as anti-government forces in Libya continue to capture more of the country, Muammar al-Gaddafi's options are dwindling. Coming up, we'll take a look at what parts of the country are still going through under the colonel's control. And later, the state of press freedom in Malaysia, how new media regulations are sparking an angry backlash.
Hello again. We're seeing an awful lot of wet weather across the northern parts of Asia at the moment. The heavier downpours are now moving away from the northern parts of China there. So here they'll be cloudy, just 1 or 2 showers to deal with here. Instead, here's that heavier rain making its way across the southern half of Japan. Very heavy downpours out of that. But this should clear as we head through the day on Tuesday. Then there'll still be a lot of cloud around and 1 or 2 showers, but it shouldn't be the heavy and persistent rain. Now, all of that grey weather does extend further south as well. So for the southeastern parts of China, also lots of cloud here as well. That cloud will be capable of giving us 1 or 2 showers. The heaviest of those will be here, just making their way through Shanghai there. Heavy downpours I expect, particularly during the afternoon. Now, a little bit further south, and for the southern parts of the Philippines, the wet weather here really is pepping up. An area of low pressure does appear to be developing, so very wet as we head through the next couple of days here. Elsewhere, there will also be some heavy showers, particularly across Java there. There, it does look very wet, even for Jakarta as well. Now, for Australia, the wettest weather here is still in the far north. Torrentially heavy downpours out of this band of wet weather as we head through the next couple of days, so certainly it's very wet here. Further south, it should be an awful lot drier here. Warm for us in Adelaide, but cooler in Melbourne at 19.
People talk about televising the revolution. It's tweeting the revolution, Facebooking the revolution, videotaping the revolution.
A new world driven by new media.
This is a very peculiar moment in media history.
Nobody can force me in 2011 to watch whatever I don't want to watch.
Analyzing the media's role in shaping modern history. The Listening Post, at this time on Al Jazeera.